Hello and welcome. In this explainer, we're going to tackle a really critical topic for any growing nonprofit: state-mandated audit thresholds. It's an area that causes a lot of confusion, so our goal here is to break it all down for you.
This resource is brought to you by Ironwood Registrations. It's part of our series on multi-state fundraising compliance, where we try to make these pretty complex topics clear and, actually practical for nonprofit leaders and their finance teams.
All right, let me start with a question that catches a lot of nonprofit leaders by surprise. Many just assume that audit requirements are only set by federal law or maybe by their own internal policies. But the reality is, individual states have their own rules tied to fundraising registration, and they're all triggered by your revenue.
So here's what we're going to walk through. First, what an audit threshold even is. Then, we'll get into why states require them in the first place, how to navigate some of the tricky rules, a few common pitfalls to watch out for, and, most importantly, how you can plan ahead so you're never caught off guard.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. What exactly is an audit threshold?
An audit threshold is basically a line in the sand. It's a specific revenue level set by a state, and once your nonprofit's annual revenue crosses that line, you are now required to submit independently audited financial statements with your charitable registration renewal.
And here's a super critical detail that trips a lot of organizations up. These thresholds are almost always based on your total gross revenue, not just the money you're bringing in from your fundraising campaigns.
What makes all of this so complicated is just how much these thresholds can vary. For instance, you might find one state sets the trigger at $500,000 in total revenue. But then you go one state over, and they might raise that bar a bit higher, setting their threshold at, say, $750,000.
And then another state might wait until your revenue actually goes over $1 million. It's this huge range that really makes multi-state compliance something you have to pay close attention to.
So, you might be wondering, why do states even have these rules in the first place? Well, it really all comes down to transparency and protecting public trust. See, from a regulator's point of view, an independent audit gives them a few key assurances. It provides that external review by a licensed CPA, it confirms that your financials are following standard accounting principles, and ultimately, it just increases public accountability for how donated funds are being managed.
This really gets to the core of how regulators think. From their perspective, as an organization's revenue grows, so does its impact on the public. So higher revenue is seen as a higher public risk, and that's what triggers stricter reporting requirements. It's all about safeguarding donor interests.
Okay, now let's get into the practical side of things, especially the challenges for organizations that are either growing fast or working in more than one state.
Now, I know we've said this before, but it's so important that it's worth repeating. This is the single most common misunderstanding. Remember, total gross revenue can include things like program service fees, investment income, even government grants, not just what you raise from donors. This means your program could be growing, and that alone could push you over the threshold.
So for any nonprofit registered in multiple states, this becomes a real compliance puzzle. Every single state can have its own revenue threshold, its own definition of what even counts as revenue, different requirements for a full audit versus a less intense financial review, and of course, different deadlines for everything.
Because of all this complexity, it is incredibly common for even well-meaning, organized nonprofits to get caught off guard. Let's look at a few of the most common ways this happens.
We tend to see this play out in a few classic ways. First, there's rapid growth. A huge grant comes in and boom, you're suddenly over the line. Another one is delayed awareness. You don't realize you crossed the threshold last year until you're trying to file this year's renewal. And finally, there's expansion. You register in a new state and don't realize it has a much lower audit threshold than you're used to.
When these kinds of surprises happen, the fallout can be pretty significant. It can delay your registration renewals, create a ton of administrative strain, lead to totally unexpected and unbudgeted accounting costs, and put a whole lot of pressure on your finance team to get an audit done yesterday.
But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. The solution really is to shift your mindset from being reactive to being proactive when it comes to compliance.
It's really helpful to shift your perspective here. Audit thresholds aren't some kind of penalty for being successful. Think of them as predictable scaling mechanisms. As your organization grows and has a bigger public impact, the financial reporting expectations just grow right along with you.
This really highlights the two paths you can take. The reactive approach, that usually leads to a last-minute scramble, maybe even an administrative crisis. But the proactive approach,
Well, that involves advanced planning, and it turns compliance into a predictable, manageable part of your operations. So, what does being proactive actually look like? Well, it means actively monitoring your total annual revenue throughout the year. It means knowing the specific thresholds in every single state where you're registered. And it means keeping a close eye on your upcoming renewal deadlines. Doing this lets you anticipate the need for an audit, not just react to it.
And that really brings us to our final and most crucial takeaway. Understanding these thresholds isn't just a compliance task, it's a fundamental part of responsible fundraising. As you grow, your obligations become more structured. The key to it all is simple. Clear planning today prevents administrative strain tomorrow.